Hola, sorry. It took a bit longer than I expected. But here I am. And here is the scene. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you all doing? Hope you're fine. Oh, quite well. Another busy day, another busy day. Today we continue with our lovely story of Spice and Wolf. Chapter 2. Nothing has really happened yet in this book, so my guess, shit's about to go down. Let me turn this music down a little bit. Why is it so loud? I can't. Does this work? Oh, it's just loud. Okay, alright. Now for me it's a bit loud. I don't know how it's for you, but I could always do just this. That's better. Well. Take a sip of water. And let's start our adventure of Spice and Wolf. My glasses real quick. They're dirty. That should be good enough. Sorry, I'm very autistic. I don't like dirty glasses. Okay, that's not entirely true, but oh well. No matter how plagued with worry merchants may be, it is said that they always manage to sleep well. So it was that, despite Lawrence's concern that Hollow might depart on her own during the night, Lawrence slept soundly and awoke to birdsong coming through his window. He didn't do anything so fragrant as jumping frantically out of bed, but Lawrence did glance at the bed next to him, and sighed in relief when he saw that Hollow was still there. He got out of bed to look outside the window. It was quite cold within the room, but the early morning air outside was still colder. His breath turned smoke white in it. Oh, his breath turned smoke white in it. Yet the cold air was perfectly clear. A morning made of crystal. There were already people on the street that the inn faced, looking down at the town merchants, who rose still earlier than the notorious early rising traveling merchants. Lawrence arranged the day's plans in his mind, finally saying, "All right," to himself when they were in order. Though it would not exactly compensate for the previous night's blunder, Lawrence wanted to be able to fully enjoy the festival, which started the next day, with Hollow. And that meant concluding his business today. The first order of business would be selling the merchandise he'd gotten in Ruvenhagen. He thought to himself that as he turned around to look back in the room. He thought that to himself as he turned around to look back into the room. Still a bit heavy-hearted from the previous evening, Lawrence walked over to his companion, who slumbered away as usual, intending to wake her, when he stopped and furrowed his brows. It wasn't unusual for Hollow to sleep as late as she pleased, but something else was amiss. Her usual gilious snoring was entirely absent. Lawrence wondered if the silence was what he thought it was. Reaching out to her, she seemed to sense it. The blanket stirred minutely. He lifted the covers up gently. What he saw made him sigh. Hollow's face beneath the covers was more pathetic than an abandoned kitten. Hungover again, eh? Her ears twitched slightly. Perhaps it hurt too much to move her head. He thought about teasing Hollow about it, but remembered the previous night and thought better of it. And in any case, she would be in no mood to listen. I'll bring you a cup of water. And a bucket, just in case. You just be good and rest. He put the extra emphasis on the be good part. Which her ears twitched and yet again. Lawrence didn't think she would behave. I didn't think she would behave just because he told her to, but she was unlikely to go wandering off in her current state. Given the impossibility of her packing up and striking off on her own, he let himself relax a bit. He knew Hollow was fully capable of faking a hangover, but her face had been so pale he doubted this one was fake. Turning the thoughts over in his head, he finished his preparations for going out without saying another word, and then came to her bedside. She was evidently incapable of so much as turning herself over. The festival doesn't get going until tomorrow, so you needn't rush yourself. Relief showed instantly on Hollow's exhausted, alcohol-ravaged face. Lawrence had to laugh. It seemed that even suffering a hangover was less important to Hollow than attending the festival. I'll be back in the afternoon. Hollow's ears were still. This statement did not interest her. Lawrence gave a strained smile, at which point the corners of Hollow's mouth curled ever so slowly into a grin. She seemed to be doing it on purpose. Lawrence slumped over and drew the covers back over Hollow. She was undoubtedly still grinning away under there. Still, he was genuinely relieved that she seemed not to hold a grudge from the previous night. As he left the room, Lawrence took one more look back at Hollow. Her tail stuck out from underneath the blanket, and it flicked twice, as if waving goodbye. Thinking he would buy her something tasty, he closed the door behind him. Trying to do business before the ring of the bell that opens a market is not generally smiled upon in any town, and this is even truer when one is smack dab in the middle of a marketplace. However, depending on the time and circumstances, this rule can be bent. In Cumberson, it was even half encouraged to mitigate the congestion that came with the opening of the market during the festival. So, despite the early hour, with the sun just beginning to rise above the buildings, the marketplace, which took up half of the Cumberson Southern Plaza, was already busy with merchants. Here and there were stacks of crates and piles of burlap sacks, and pigs, chickens, and all manner of livestock stood tied up or caged in the cramped spaces between goods and the stalls. As Cumberson was the largest exporter of fish in the landlocked region, it was easy to spot fish swimming in huge barrels of fresh water, not unlike ones Amati had been hauling the previous day. Just as Hollow was unable to hide her excitement when faced with a line of eateries, Lawrence's pulse could not help but quicken when he saw the vast array of goods in the marketplace. How much profit could one make transporting this good to that town? This other commodity was so plentiful, there must be a surplus of it in that location. Would the price be lower? Such thoughts chased each other through Lawrence's mind. When he was just starting out as a merchant, Lawrence had no sense of what was a favorable price for a good. So he wandered about aimlessly without knowing what to do, but now he could discern all kinds of things. Once a merchant fully grasps this intricate web of commodities, he became like an alchemist, transmuting lead into gold. Lawrence felt giddy at the power of this notion afforded him until he remembered his failure in Ruvenhagen, which he chuckled at, chagrined. Turning one's eyes to avarice made it all the more easy to stumble after all. He took a breath to calm himself, grasping the reins and heading into the center of the marketplace. The stall he finally arrived at was already well into its business day. Like all the others, the shop's owner was just a year removed from Lawrence and had also started out as a traveling merchant. The fact that he had become a proper wheat merchant, complete with a stall which, despite its small size, even had a proper roof, was generally attributed to the man's good fortune. He had even adopted a Scottish facial hairstyle that was common in the region. Said wheat merchant, Mark Cole, was momentarily surprised upon seeing Lawrence, but he immediately composed himself and raised a hand in greeting, smiling. The other merchant that Mark dealt with turned to regard Lawrence as well, nodding in greeting. One never knew when he might encounter someone who could become a business partner, so Lawrence flashed his best merchant smile and gestured at them to, by all means, please continue their conversation. L'espandi Amerit, Amirto van Dergi. Aha! Peregi Bao. Evidently their exchange was just ending, and the man spoke to Mark in a language Lawrence didn't understand, and then took his leave. Naturally, Lawrence did not forget to give the man another professional smile as he left. He committed the man's face to memory, in case they were to meet again in some other town. These were the tiny interactions that accumulated over time, eventually turning into profit. The merchant, who was probably from somewhere in the Northlands, disappeared into the crowds. Lawrence finally had descended from his wagon. I guess I interrupted your business.
Ah, hardly. He was just talking my ear off about how grateful he was to the god of Pitra Mountain. You saved me, said Mark, rolling up in a sheet of parchment as he sat atop a wooden chest. He smiled at the tedium of the man's conversation. Mark, like Lawrence, was a member of the Rowan Trade Guild. Their acquaintance was the result of showing up every year in the same marketplace to trade. And the two had known each other since the very beginning of their respective careers. They could easily skip the usual formalities. If I'd known better, I wouldn't have bothered learning their language. They're not bad men, but once they figure out you can understand them, you'll never hear the end about how great their god is.
It might be that a local deity is still better than a god who never leaves the shrine except when they spy a flash of gold, eh? Said Lawrence. Mark laughed, tapping his own head and with the now rolled up parchment.
You're not lying, and they say harvest gods are all beautiful women.
Hollow's face appeared in Lawrence's mind. He nodded and grinned, but of course he did not say what sprang to his mind. But they have terrible personalities.
Anyway, Anyway, enough of such talk. I'll be scolded by the missus for sure. Shall we talk of trade? I presume that's why you're here?
Mark's expression shifted from friendly banter to business. Though there was no need for formalities between the two, their relationship was a calculated one. Lawrence readied himself for the exchange and spoke. I've brought nails from Ruvenhagen. Thought you might want to buy them up.
Nails, eh? I'm a wheat seller. Did you hear somewhere that we now nail our section of wheat closed? I think not.
But you'll soon have many customers laying in supplies for the long winter. You could sell those nails just as you sell the wheat. People who need to brace up their homes against the snow. Mark looked skyward for a moment before rolling his gaze back to Lawrence.
I suppose that's true. Nails, you say? How many?
I've 120 nails of 3 pate in length. 200 in 4 pate and 200 in 5 pate. Along with a statement of quality from Ruvenhagen's Blacksmith's Guild. Mark scratched his cheek with one end of the rolled up parchment and sighed. This feigned reluctance was common a merchant trait.
I'll take the lot for 10.5 lumione.
What's the lumione trading at now against Treni silver?
34, even when yesterday's market was closed, so that'd be 357 Treni. Too low by far, sir.
The amount wasn't even as much as Lawrence had spent to buy the nails. Mark's brow furrowed at Lawrence's quick answer.
Have you heard about the crash in armor prices?
Mark asked.
With no military expeditions into the north this year, people are unloading armor and swords left and right, which means there's a glut of raw iron. Even nails are cheaper now. Even 10 lumione is a generous price.
It was the response he had expected, so Lawrence calmed himself and replied, Aye, but that's in the south. When there's so much iron to be melted down, the price of fuel will rise enough to make it impractical. If you can buy enough firewood to melt iron this time of year in Ploania, I'd sure like to see it. Anybody that tries is likely to have their head split with a kindle axe. Once winter came to regions with a lot of snow, the supply of firewood stagnated. The iron forges, with their bottomless appetite for fuel, were abandoned during the winter. If some blacksmith did decide to forge in the winter, the price of firewood would immediately skyrocket, and he would soon find himself showered in the curses of the shivering townspeople. Thus, even if the raw materials for nails was suddenly abundant in the region, the original price of those nails should hold steady. Any merchant with a bit of experience would be able to put this together. Unsurprisingly, Mark grinned.
Come now, you must be selling nails to a poor wheat merchant. Must you be selling nails to a poor wheat merchant? If it's grain, then sure, I know how to buy it cheap. But nails are far from my specialty.
16 lumione then?
Too dear. 13.
15?
14 2/3.
Mark's medium frame stiffened, leaving him log-like. Lawrence could tell he would get no further in his negotiations. Pushing it would only damage the business relationship. Lawrence nodded and extended his right hand. It's done then.
Well met, guild brother.
said Mark with a smile, shaking Lawrence's hand. The price was undoubtedly quite a compromise on Mark's end as well. As a wheat merchant, Mark was not, strictly speaking, even allowed to buy or sell nails. Which merchant could sell what good was decided by their respective guilds. So, to stock a new item, a merchant had to either obtain the permission of the other merchants already selling the item, or cut them in on the profits. At glance, this rule seemed to obstruct free trade, but if it was absent, giant companies with huge amounts of capital would soon swallow the entire marketplace. The rule was designed to prevent that from happening.
Would you prefer to settle it up in coin or credit?
Credit, if you please.
Thank goodness. There are so many clash deals this time of year, it's hard to keep up.
While traders had no trouble keeping track of their deals in the ledger books, plenty of people bringing goods into the village and towns would want coin and only coin, but currency shortages were a serious problem in any town. Even if a merchant had access to buy a particular good without the currency to make the payment, there would be no commerce at all. And a literate farmer wouldn't even blow his nose on a promissory note. In the wilderness, it was the knight with his sword who was the strongest, but in the cities, coin equaled power. This was why the church had grown so wealthy. Collecting tithes every week after week, it could not help but become powerful. So since I'm taking credit, I've got a favor to ask of you, said Lawrence as Mark approached to unload the sacks of nails from the wagon bed. The wheat merchant's face grew instantly wary. It's nothing terribly important. I've got to head north to take care of something, and I wondered if you'd asked after the conditions of the roads and passes up that way. Your customer before here was from the north, no? Seeing that Lawrence's question had nothing to do with business, Mark visibly relaxed. His shift in expression was obviously intentional. Lawrence noted with his chagrin. It was probably Mark's way of getting back at Lawrence a bit for selling the nails so dear.
Aye, that's easy enough, said Mark. Though it would have been easier for you to come in summertime, as you normally do. Must be something pretty big to get you heading up north in midwinter.
Well, you know, this and that will say, this and that. I will say it's nothing to do with business, though.
Even the ever-traveling merchant can't free himself from life's little obligations. So where are you heading?
A place called Yoitze. Heard of it? Mark leaned on the cart as he raised a single eyebrow.
Can't say I have, but who knows how many little towns and villages I've never heard of.
You want me to find someone who knows it then? Well, in any case, we're heading for Nyohira. So you can ask about Yoitze sort of by the way. That'll be fine.
Right then. So if you're bound for Nyohira, you'll be crossing the Dolan Plains.
You know the way then? And that makes it easier for me. The wheat merchant nodded and thumped his chest, as if to say, leave it to me. Mark would surely be able to collect the information Lawrence needed. This was exactly why Lawrence had come to Mark in the first place. But if he had interrupted the wheat merchant during this most busy of season simply to gather information without bringing some business along as well, it would have weighed on his conscience. And Mark would have been none too pleased. That is why he brought the nails to sell. Lawrence was well aware that Mark knew many of the area blacksmiths. It would be easy for Mark to sell off the nails to any of them for a tidy profit. Mark would even be able to ask for a portion of the payment for those nails in cash. As a wheat merchant for whom the last chance to save up money was rapidly approaching, the chance to get a bit of hard coin into his hand would probably make him happier than any meager profit. As Lawrence had expected, Mark readily agreed. That took care of the need to gather information on the upcoming travel. Oh yes, there was another thing I wanted to ask you about. Don't worry, this will be quick.
Do I look that stingy?
Lawrence met Mark's chagrined smile. Does this town have any chroniclers?
Chroniclers? Oh, you mean the people who write those endless diaries of town's events?
Chroniclers were paid a retainer by nobles or church officials and kept histories of the given area or town. Lawrence couldn't help but laugh at hearing Marx dismiss their work as endless diaries. It wasn't entirely accurate, but nor was it far from the truth, which made it all the funnier. I don't think they'd like you putting it in that way, but yes, Lawrence said.
It just bothers me that all they need to do is earn coin is to sit in a chair all day and write.
That's a little hard to take from someone who got so lucky in the deal he was able to open his shop in the town. The story of Mark's good fortune was a famous one. Lawrence laughed again, this time Mark's momentarily stunned expression. So, are there any chroniclers or nay?
Yes, I think there are. But I wouldn't get mixed up with them if I were you, said Mark,
taking hold of a bag of nails in Lawrence's wagon.
Rumor has it one was accused of heresy by a monastery somewhere and had to flee. The town's filled with people like that who had to run.
The townspeople of Commerson were less concerned with the animosities between pagans and the church than they were with the economic prosperity, so the town had naturally become a refuge for a variety of naturalists, philosophers, and other such heretics. I just have some things I want to ask after, said Lawrence. Chroniclers collect local legends and such, yes? I have an interest in such matters.
Now why would you care about that? Do you need conversation starters for when you travel north?
Something like that. I know it's sudden, but do you think you might introduce me to one? Mark turned his head slightly and called out toward his stand with a bag of nails in one hand. A boy emerged from behind the mountain of wheat sacks. Evidently, Mark had reached a point where he could have an apprentice. I do know one.
Better if it's someone from the Rowan, right?
Said Mark, handing the bag of nails to his young apprentice. Seeing this, Lawrence was filled with a renewed sense of urgency to get to Yoitse and return to his normal business routine as quickly as he could. Yet it would be trouble if Hollow discerned that fact, and for his part, it was not as though Lawrence wished to be rid of her. He found it impossible to reconcile his two feelings on the issue. If he lived as long as Hollow did, taking a year or two off from business would hardly be an issue, but Lawrence's life was too short for that.
What's the matter?
Hmm? Oh, nothing. Yes, if there's a chronicler in the trade guild, that would be convenient. Can I ask you to introduce me?
I can certainly do that much, yes. I'll even do it for free.
Lawrence couldn't help but smile at the effort of Mark put into saying free.
Is sooner better?
If possible, yes.
I'll send the boy out then. There's a fearless old peddler named Gibatos
There. And if I'm remembering right, he's close with a pagan hermit
who's done chronicle work. Old Batos takes the
week before and after the festival off, so if you go by the guild house around midday, you'll find him drinking that day away. Even within the single guild such as the Rowan Trade Guild, traveling merchants like Lawrence might not know many others within it, like Amati, whose business was unrelated to Lawrence's own. Lawrence repeated Gibatos's name to himself, carving it into his memory. Understood. I mean your debt. Ah, if that's all it takes to be in my debt, I'd hate to think what comes next. Enough of that talk. You'll be in the town until the festival ends, right? Yes? Stop by for a drink, won't you? I suppose I could let you brag your success at least once. I'll be by. Mark raised his voice in a laugh and then sighed as he handed the last bag of nails to his apprentice. Even a town merchant endures endless troubles and worries, though. Sometimes I wish I could go back to traveling. Lawrence could only smile in vague agreement, as he was still toiling day in, day out to achieve what Mark already had. Mark seemed to realize this. Forget I said it, he said, smiling apologetically.
All we can do is keep our noses to the grindstone. It's the same for all merchant.
True enough. Good fortune to us both, then. Lawrence shook hands with Mark, and after seeing another customer come to call on the wheat merchant, he put the stall behind him. He slowly maneuvered his wagon into the crowd and then looked back at Mark's stand. There stood Mark, who seemed to have forgotten about Lawrence entirely and was now embroiled in negotiations with his next customer. Lawrence was frankly envious. But even Mark, the successful town merchant, said he sometimes wished to return to traveling. Lawrence remembered a story. Long ago, there was a king who planned to alleviate the poverty in his own kingdom by invading the prosperous nation next to his own. But a court poet had said this: one always sees the wretched parts of one's own land and the best parts of one's neighbors. Lawrence thought on the story. He had been focusing on the troubles involved in finding Hollow's homeland or the setbacks he suffered in Ruvenhagen, but the fact was that he had been able to travel with a companion of rare quality. If Lawrence had never encountered Hollow, he would have continued along his usual trade route, enduring the endless loneliness that came with it. It had once been so bad that he started to seriously fantasize about what it would be like if the horse became human. As he pondered this, Lawrence realized that one of his dreams had already come true. There was a good chance that eventually he would be traveling alone again, and when the time came, Lawrence knew he would look back on this time with Hollow with no shortage of fondness. Lawrence gripped the reins once again. Once he finished making the rounds through the trade guilds and merchants' firms, he would make sure to buy a truly delicious lunch for Hollow. Cumberson lacked a church, so it was a bell tower atop the highest roof of the tallest noble house in the town that grandly rang the noontime bell each day. The bell, of course, was decorated with carvings of the finest sorts, and the roof, visible throughout the entire town, was maintained by the finest artisans that could be had. It was said that the roof constructed solely because of the vanity of the nobility it housed, had cost fully 300 lumione, but the people in the town bore the nobles no ill will, reasoning that it was doing such things that made one nobility. Perhaps the reason most wealthy merchants who hoarded their money in great vaults were so richly resented was because they lacked that playful sense of extravagance. Even the most famously violent of knights would be beloved if he spent freely enough. Lawrence thought on this as he opened the door to his room and was struck face on the sharp tang of liquor. So it smelled this bad, did it? Lawrence suddenly regretted not rinsing his mouth before venturing out. But the great part of the smell was surely the fault of the wolf that had now slept before him. Although showed no signs of stirring even when Lawrence entered the room. But her artless snoring suggested that she had mostly recovered from her hangover. The stink of liquor was too much for Lawrence, so he opened the window before approaching the bed. The glass of water next to it was empty, as was fortunately the bucket. Her face sticking out of the bedcloth looked paler than it had before. Lawrence had bought real wheat bread, which was rarely indulged in, instead of honeyed crackers. This had been the right choice, he felt. He was sure that the first words out of Hollow's mouth upon awakening would be, "I'm hungry." Lawrence held a bag of bread up to Hollow's nose, which twitched slightly. Unlike the tough, bitter oat and rye bread they often wound up eating, the scent of the soft, tender wheat bread was wholly enticing. Hollow sniffing at the bag was enough to make Lawrence doubt whether she was actually asleep. At length, she made a small, artless sound and then buried her face within the covers. Lawrence looked down at the foot of the bed, where he saw Hollow's tail sticking out from the covers, trembling slightly. She seemed to be in mid-yawn there beneath the bedcloth. Lawrence waited a spell, and sure enough, Hollow's bleary-eyed face eventually emerged from underneath the covers. Something smells amazing. Feeling better? Hollow rubbed her eyes, yawned again, and spoke as if to herself. I'm hungry. Despite his best efforts not to, Lawrence burst out laughing. Not seeming particularly interested, Hollow slowly hauled herself up and yawned a third time. She then sniffed the air and turned her gluttonous face to the bag Lawrence held. I figured you'd say that. I splurged and got some wheat bread. As soon as Lawrence handed over the bag, the proud wise wolf became like a cat, presented with a treat. Will you not eat some? Hollow sat there on the bed, clutching the bag and devouring pure white bread, looking anything but willing to share. Even as she posed the question to him, her mien was now closer to that of a hunting dog who had no intention of letting its prey escape. It was probably at the limits of Hollow's generosity to even venture to ask before she finished the entire bag. No, I'm fine. I had a taste earlier. Normally she would have regarded him with some suspicion, but Hollow, true to her ability to see right through a lie, seemed to accept this as truth. Visibly relieved, she returned to her assault on the bread. Careful, you'll choke. Lawrence remembered when shortly after he and Hollow first met, she nearly choked on some potatoes at the small church they had passed the night in. She shot him a glare, which he chuckled at. He pulled a chair out from the desk and sat. Upon the desk were several wax-sealed envelopes. After making the rounds among various trading firms, Lawrence had received several letters addressed to him. Despite their inherent lifestyle, traveling merchants had many opportunities to send and receive letters as their seasonal stops were very predictable. Some offered to buy a certain good at a high price if they happened to be passing through a given town that was selling it. Others told of a good price in the town, in their towns, and asked how it was doing elsewhere. The correspondence was diverse, yet it was strange, Lawrence felt. It generally came through Cumberson in the summertime, so it was out of the ordinary for letters to be reaching him here now on the very threshold of winter. In the worst case, the letters would have wound up languished in the files of trading companies for more than half a year. If the letters had not been found by Lawrence in Cumberson within 2 weeks, they were to be sent to the south. So it went without saying that such arrangements cost a pretty penny. It was clear that the letters were urgent. The senders were all town merchants situated in northern Ploania. Lawrence carefully removed the wax seals with a knife when he sensed Hollow peering intently at him. "They're letters." Came Hollow's short reply as she sat herself on the desk, bread in hand. Lawrence didn't mind if she saw the envelope's contents, so after breaking the seal, he took the He took the letter out right there on the spot. Dear Mr. Lawrence, the fact that a letter did not begin with "In the name of our Lord" was very much in keeping with a northern style. Lawrence skimmed the pleasantries and moved his gaze down the page. Following the messy, hurriedly composed handwriting, he quickly discerned the letter's import. It was indeed critical information for a merchant to have. He read the second letter, confirming that its contents were the same as the first, and then sighed, smiling slightly. What do they say? Care to take a guess? Perhaps irritated at having her guess answered with another question, Hollow frowned and rolled her eyes. They hardly seem like love letters. Even a love of 100 years would find this adore cooled by such messy handwriting, Lawrence thought. He handed the letters to Hollow and grinned. You always get important information after you most need it. These letters were sent out of sincere concern, so I owe them some gratitude at least. What do you think? Hollow licked her fingers, either out of contentment or because she had simply eaten all there was to eat, and looked at the letters, held in the other hand. She then shoved them back to Lawrence, a sour expression on her face. I cannot read. You can't? Lawrence took the letters, and Hollow narrowed her eyes at him. If you're feigning ignorance, I must say you're getting better at it. You're getting better at it. No, I really had no idea. Hollow regarded him for a moment as if to ascertain the truth of his words, and then she turned away with a sigh. First of all, she said, there are too many letters to remember and too many baffling combinations. You might say all one needs to do is write as one would speak, but that's clearly a lie. It seemed Hollow had wants to learn to read. You mean the constant the constant notion and such? I have no idea what you call them, but the rules are too complex by far. If there was one way in which you humans exceeded us wolves, it's your mastery of those inexplicable symbols. Lawrence very nearly asked if other wolves were similarly unable to write, but he swallowed the question at the last second, merely nodding his agreement. Though it is not a simple matter for us to memorize them either, he said. I had no easy time of it, and every time I made a mistake my teacher would strike me on the head for it. I thought I'd have a permanent lump. Hollow regarded him dubiously. If she thought he was merely humouring her, she would have undoubtedly become angry. Surely you can tell that I'm not lying, said Lawrence. Hollow finally turned her doubtful gaze away. So what is it that's written there? It says that the northern campaigns have been cancelled, so be careful of buying up armor. Lawrence said, tossing the letters aside. He grinned ruefully at Hollow's blank look. So if you had but received that letter sooner, you wouldn't have gotten into trouble? Indeed, such is hindsight. But the fact these two merchants would spend coin to deliver this message to me is worth knowing. I can trust these two. And yet the difference between reading and not reading the letters was the difference between heaven and hell. It's no joke that you've the right of it. No question. A single letter can determine your fate. A merchant without information might as well be heading out onto a battlefield with a blindfold. I don't know about your eyes, but you surely cover your shame often enough. Lawrence was about to put the letters back into the envelopes when he heard this and froze, muttering an oath. Even teasing you does not dispel my drowsiness. Hollow yawned and hopped off the desk, walking over to the bed. Lawrence watched her bitterly. She turned to him. Oh yes, we can go to the festival now, yes? She asked as she picked up the robe that had been discarded on the bed. Her eyes twinkling so brightly that they were nearly audible. Seeing her thus, Lawrence wanted to take her out, but he had other business to attend to first. Sorry, not yet. Lawrence was cut off mid-sentence. Hollow clutched her robe tightly, seeming on the verge of tears. Even if you're joking, please stop that, I beg you, he said. So you're weak against this sort of thing? I'll remember that, said Hollow, abandoning the act. Lawrence found that he had nothing to refute with. Having had yet another weakness exposed, he turned back to the desk defeated. But can I not go into town myself? You'll go whether or not I give you permission. I suppose that's true. Lawrence returned the letters to their envelopes and turned to Hollow once again. She held on to her robe, looking awkward. At first he sighed inwardly. Was she really playing this game again so soon? But then he realized that without any money she would be able to do little else than stare at the stalls, which to Hollow was akin to living death. In other words, she needed marching money, but she couldn't bring herself to ask for it. I don't have any small change right now, so don't spend it all in one place. He stood and produced a silver Irhet, Irecht, from the coin purse at his waist, then walked over to Hollow and handed it to her. The coin bore an image of the seventh ruler of Cumberson. It was not as valuable as a trenny piece, so it's not as valuable as a trenny piece, so you shouldn't get the evil eye. You shouldn't get the evil eye if you try to buy some bread with it. They'll make a change without a fuss. Replied Hollow instantly, even as she took the coin. Lawrence instantly wondered if what she wanted was more money. But if he betrayed his suspicion, she would really have. He betrays this suspicion, she would really have him cornered. Lawrence forced himself to maintain his neutral expression. What's wrong? Oh. One had to be careful when she was being so meek. Lawrence's head shifted into negotiation mode. I was just thinking that it would be a bit of a waste to go alone. Hollow said, and just like that, his mind spun fruitlessly. What business have you remaining? If you'll take me along, I'll return the silver piece, she said. I was just meeting with someone. Well, I'm going to wander about anyway. If you don't want me near, I'll keep my distance. Take me along, won't you? She wasn't being especially fawning or wheedling. She simply wanted to come along, it seemed. If she'd cocked her head and said something like, "Oh, do please take me with you," he would have suspected her of putting on an act, but her request was entirely normal. If it really was an act, Lawrence felt like he wouldn't mind falling for it. And in case it wasn't an act, Hollow would surely be hurt by his suspicion. I'm really sorry. Can you let me go alone today? I've got to meet with someone, and then I expect we'll be going elsewhere. So I can be introduced to someone else. If you came along, you'd have to wait outside nearly the whole time. I should be able to finish up all my business today, and then starting tomorrow, we can take our time and enjoy the festival. So you can manage on your own for one more day? He talked with the same tone he would use on a grill of 10, but Hollow standing there beside the bed looked roughly that vulnerable. Lawrence understood how she felt. It was precisely because he was not over fond of going to the winter festival alone that he came to Cumberson only in the summertime. Once the crowds became so thick that he could not help bumping into people, the loneliness became that much keener. Going to a party of trading firms and then returning alone to an inn was similarly desolate. Lawrence dearly wanted to bring Hollow along with him, but this particular errand made that impossible. He was going to be introduced to Guy Batos, thus making contact with the town chronicler that Batos evidently knew. One of the headmasters of a trading firm Lawrence had visited also knew of the chronicler. Lawrence had taken the opportunity to find out more while he picked up his letters. As he suspected, the chronicler collected not only information on Ploania, but also wrote down pagan tales from farther north. If the tales of Yoitze were to come up, it would go badly if Hollow was there to hear them, since Lawrence knew one such tale wherein Yoitze had been destroyed by a bear spirit. He had trouble imagining that he would hear Yoitze was now prospering. Hiding the fact forever would be difficult, but Lawrence thought he should at least try to reveal the truth to her at a suitable time. It was a delicate issue. A moment of silence passed between him and Hollow. Well, I do not wish to get in your way. I can't have you slapping my hand away again, she said, seeming even sadder, which was probably an act. Nonetheless, the fact that Lawrence had slapped Hollow back in Ruvenhagen still gnawed at him. The clever wise wolf in front of him knew this and was taking a bit of revenge for the refusal to give in to her request. I'll buy you a souvenir. Just bide one more day. So I'm to be bought off again, am I? She said accusingly, but her tail showed her anticipation. Shall I sweet talk you instead? Your words are far from sweet. They're practically inedible. I shall pass. It was a nasty thing to say, but Hollow was smiling. Her mood seemed to have improved. Lawrence waved a meek hand to indicate his defeat. I suppose I shall just wander about on my own. I'm sorry, said Lawrence, whereupon Hollow spoke again as if she just remembered something. Oh, that's right. If you were to return there, if when you return there are two people in the room who, would you mind staying out for a while? For a moment, Lawrence did not understand what she was getting at, but he finally realized that she was suggesting she might pick up a man while she was out. Given her particular charms, Lawrence thought it could certainly happen, but Lawrence had no idea what sort of expression he should assume in response to that statement. Should he be angry? Should he laugh? By the time he concluded that ignoring her was the best, Hollow grinned at him with a genuine delight. Seeing your adorable face with such will be quite enough to tide me over for the day. Lawrence found he could only sigh at her teasing. Hollow could be an infuriating wolf. I'd rather be in your arms than not, still, she said airily. Do not worry. Lawrence had no words. She could be an incredible, infuriating wolf. Lawrence opened the door to the trading company. It was afternoon, and the company indeed much more crowded than it had been earlier. The building was filled with both town merchants based in Commerson and traveling traders who operated in the area. The company was open, but doing no real business since nearly everyone was there to enjoy the festival. The room overflowed with drinking and merriment. Batos, the man acting as an intermediary between Lawrence and the chronicler, was evidently not as much of a drunkard as Mark had insinuated, and had been out of the building on business when Lawrence came in the morning. Lawrence asked him after him with the chief of the trading company. Batos had still not returned, it seemed, since he was meeting someone. Lawrence could not very well drink. Sorry. Music. Yeah, it's better. Lawrence could not very well drink, and he mused how to pass the time. There were several other merchants in similar circumstances, but they had been seduced by this festive atmosphere and were absorbed in a card game. So Lawrence couldn't very well try to engage with them with conversation. There was nothing for it but to strike up idle chatter with the trading house chief, who drank but likewise could not let himself get drunk. During their conversation, the doors opened and a single figure entered the trading house. Lawrence and the chief were situated directly across from the entrance, so Lawrence could immediately see who came into the building. It was Amati, looking more like the young son of a nobleman than any merchant. Mr. Lawrence! Mr. Lawrence! Said Amati after briefly greeting the men drinking by the door. Ah, good afternoon. Thank you for your assistance with the... good afternoon. Thank you for your assistance with the inn. Ah, not at all. I should be thanking you for ordering so much fish for dinner. My finicky companion praised it to the heavens, said that you had an excellent eye for fish. Lawrence felt this was more an effective compliment than saying he himself had enjoyed the food. He was correct. Amati's face lit up like an excited boy's. Ha! I'm delighted to hear it. If she has any other requests, I'll be buying some truly excellent fish tomorrow. She seemed to have a special love for carp. I see. Very well then, I'll go and find more than that she'll enjoy. Lawrence chuckled internally. At no point had Amati asked what he thought of the fish, but Amati had no doubt not even noticed this. Oh, incidentally, Mr. Lawrence, have you any plans at the moment? I'm killing time before I meet with Mr. Batos. Ah, I see. Why do you ask? Amati's expression clouded over as he fumbled for words, but he resolutely overcame this in a manner befitting the merchant used to battling with fish markets day in day out. Yes, actually, I was thinking perhaps I could show you and your companion around the town. Our meeting on the road was the will of God, surely. I don't doubt I could learn much from talking with a traveling merchant such as yourself. Amati sounded quite modest, but Lawrence knew that the boy had his sights set on Holo. If Amati had a tail, Lawrence was sure it would be switching back and forth excitedly. Lawrence had an idea. Surely, I surely appreciate the invitation, and my companion Holo had been wanting to get a look of the town, but I don't think... Amati's expression changed. If it's alright with you, I would be happy to show just Miss Holo. In truth, I finished my work for the day and quite free. Oh, I couldn't possibly... Lawrence wasn't sure whether or not his feigned surprise was convincing, but Amati did not seem to be able to read Lawrence's expression quite that well. Amati, after all, was thinking only of Holo. Not at all. If left to my own devices, I'll simply drink all my profits away. To be blunt, this works out nicely for me. I would be happy to escort her. I see. Well, she's not so well behaved as to stay in the inn simply because I told her to. She may not be there at all. Haha. As it happens, I need to go by the inn and discuss a purchase with them, so I'll inquire after her while I'm there. If she's there, I'll invite her out. I'm so sorry to impose. No, not at all. Please allow me to show you around the town as well next time. Amati's skill with pleasantries marked him as a merchant through and through. He must have been 5 or 6 years younger than Lawrence, but despite his callow appearance, he was no doubt a canny trader. Though Amati's attention had been quite diverted by Holo, he remained thoroughly poised. Lawrence was just musing on how he would have to be careful not to let his guard down around the boy when the trading company's door opened again. Amati looked toward the door at the same time as Lawrence. Looks like I had good timing, said Amati, and Lawrence soon understood why. As the saying goes, his party had arrived. Well then, Mr. Lawrence, I'll take my leave. Yes, thank you again. Thank you, again. Whether he had no visible business in the trading house or his head was so full of visions of Holo that he forgot why he'd come, Amati left the building. Though Lawrence left her with some silver, he thought Holo was still probably lounging about in bed at the inn. Given Amati's state, he'd be a perfect mark for Holo, who would probably have no trouble getting him to buy her whatever she wanted. For a moment, Lawrence almost felt sorry for the poor boy, but he knew Amati would be all too happy to undo the strings on his coin purse for Hollow. Nothing would make Lawrence happier than Hollow's mood being lifted by someone else's coin. If only he could be so clever when dealing directly with Hollow, he thought. She did not just pull his leg, she swept it clean from under him. As Lawrence wondered if Hollow's wit exceeded his own by as much as her age did, the man who entered by the trading house was just as Amati left, scanned the room, and then began to walk towards Lawrence. Mark's apprentice had apparently run about the town to inform Battles of Lawrence's request, which was undoubtedly why Battles now approached him. Lawrence greeted the man with a glance, flashing his merchant smile.
Craft Lawrence, I presume? I'm Guy Batos.
The hand that Battles extended in greeting was hard and rough, like a veteran soldier's. Listening to Mark tell it, Battles was the sort of man who preferred drinking his profits away to actually making any. But upon meeting the man in person, Lawrence got precisely the opposite feeling. As he walked down the street, Battles had a stocky stability about him that brought to mind a stout coffin, and his face had a tough, leathery quality from years of exposure to wind and sand, out of which he grew a spiky beard that was almost sea urchin-like. When Lawrence shook Battles' right hand in greeting, it felt like nothing. It felt nothing like the hand of an easygoing merchant who passed the days carrying nothing heavier than his cart horse's reins. It was rough and strong enough, telling that this was a man who did heavy lifting year-round. Yet despite Battles' appearance, he was neither stubborn nor ill-mannered. The words he spoke had a priestly serenity to him.
I dare say merchants who travel across the many provinces, like yourself, Mr. Lawrence, are more numerous these days. Traveling to and fro between the same place, selling the same things as I do, gets quite boring.
Ah, but the town peddlers and craftsmen would surely be angry if they heard you say so.
Right you are. There are plenty of men who've spent 50 years selling naught but leather rope. No doubt I'd get an earful if I claimed to be tired of it,
Battles said with a laugh. He told of how he was a trader of precious metals from the mines of Hyoram, and he had spent nigh 30 years going back to and forth between those rugged mountains and the town of Cumberson. Any man who could Any man who could carry those heavy loads through the mountains of Fioram, where the winds was as strong as the trees, and the trees are few, was a man to be reckoned with.
Still, I must say you are a curious fellow, Mr. Lawrence.
Oh?
I refer to your search of a chronicler, to learn the ancient tales of the Northlands. Or has it something to do with a business prospect?
Oh no, nothing like that. It's just something of a whim, I suppose.
You've got good taste for one so young. I've only recently become interested in old tales. Originally, I'd intended to rather master the way around
make business of it, but I'm afraid they've become my master rather than the other way around. Lawrence couldn't quite imagine what Battles meant by making a business of the old tales, but the man's talk was intriguing, so he kept his mouth shut and listened. It came to me after so many years of going back and forth between the same place. The world I knew was very small, you see. But even there people had been coming and going for hundreds of years. And I knew nothing about those times at all. Lawrence had an inkling of what battles meant. The more he traveled around, the more the world seemed to spread out before him infinitely. If that was the breadth of the world, in a sense, then what Battles felt was the world's depth. I'm old, you see, and I've not the vigor to go journeying afar. Neither can I travel back in time. So even if it's only by stories, I came to want to visit the places I've never been able to see in person, and to travel back to those ages that God in this capriciousness has prevented me from experiencing. When I was a young man with nothing on my mind but profit, such things would never have occurred to me. But now I often wonder if I'd had the chance to consider them, my life would have turned out quite differently. So I must admit, I'm a bit envious of you. Mr. Lawrence. Ha! I must sound quite ancient. Battles laughed at his own folly, but his words had left a deep impression on Lawrence. It was true that the old tales and legends allowed one to know of things that were impossible to experience directly. He felt a new weight behind the words Hollow had said to him not so many days ago when they had first met. The worlds we live in, you and I, are very different. For the greater part of time, Hollow had lived. The people from her own era had long since been dead. The era itself lost to time, and Hollow was not human but a wolf. Thinking of it, Lawrence saw that Hollow's very existence began to seem special in more ways than one. What she had seen and heard. What had she seen and heard? Where had she travelled? He began to want to ask her about her travels, perhaps when he returned to the inn. But when the church looks at old tales and legends, all they see are superstitions and pagan stories. Where the church's eye falls, tales become hard to collect. Hyoram is a mountainous region and had many fascinating stories, but the church was there, too. Cumberson is quite nice in that regard. Ploania was a country where both pagans and church existed side by side. But it was precisely because of its coexistence that the church was much stricer in the towns and regions where it held power. Pagan towns that resisted church control had to be constantly prepared for battle. Cumberson was unique in Ploania for its peaceful avoidance of those problems. Even in Cumberson, it was not the case that there was a completely lack of conflict. Lawrence and Battles headed to the North District of Cumberson in order to meet with the chronicler. The town had been built with an expansion in mind, so the city walls were constructed of wood that could be easily disassembled, and the streets and buildings were spacious. Yet, even within this town, there existed a high stone wall. The wall encircled the district housing those who had fled to Ploania because of the church's persecution. The fact that the district was walled off with stone proved that the people of the town considered it the presence of the persecuted a burden. While they were not considered criminals in Cumbersund, in Ruvenhagen, for example, they would have been beheaded as a matter of course. Upon reflection, Lawrence changed his mind. The wall did not exist simply to isolate these people. It was probably necessary for their protection. Is that sulfur? Lawrence asked. So you've handled medicinal stones as well, have you? Hyoram boasted a variety of very productive mines. And while Batos may have been used to the distinctive odors of the region, Lawrence couldn't help but make a face. The smell reached his nose as soon as they passed through the door in the stone wall, and he immediately knew what sort of people lived here. Church's greatest enemies. Alchemists. No, I've knowledge of this, I've knowledge of it as all. Knowledge is a merchant's greatest weapon. You're good at your job. It's kind of you to say so. The area within the walls was several steps lower than the outside ground. The spaces between the buildings in this district were narrower, and although they called to mind alleys Lawrence had seen in other towns, there were some strange differences. For one, many of the alleys they walked in were scattered with bird feathers. One can't always smell the poison wind. People keep small birds. Can't always smell the poison wind. People keep small birds, and if the bird suddenly dies, they know to be careful. Lawrence knew of the practice, as it was used in mines. But having to come to a place where it was actually employed sent a shiver up his spine. The phrase poisoned wind was certainly descriptive, but for Lawrence's part, he felt the church's phrase hand of death to be more apt. Apparently it had come to effect that no sooner did one notice a strange cold wind that one was paralyzed, unable to move. Lawrence wondered if the cats that he saw here and there walk down the street were kept for the same purpose as the birds, or if they instead gathered to prey on those birds. In either case, it was eerie. Mr. Batos. It had become some time since Lawrence had found walking in silence to be so difficult. The street was dim and strange, the silence punctuated by the meowing of cats and the flutter of birds. Mysterious metallic sounds rang out occasionally, and the smell of sulfur was constant. Lawrence couldn't help raising his voice. How many alchemists are in this district, would you say?
Counting apprentices. Apprentices. Perhaps 20, give or take. But in any case, accidents are common, so it's hard to know for sure.
In other words, there were a lot of fatalities. Regretting having asked the question, Lawrence shifted to a more mercantile concerns. Do you find that trading with alchemists make good business? I would think it would bring significant danger. Said Batos slowly, stepping around a barrel that held some green substance that Lawrence didn't want to look at for too long. There's a lot of profit to be had in trading with alchemists that have a nobility backing them up. They buy a lot of iron, lead, quicksilver and tin. To say nothing of copper, silver and gold. They were all quite normal commodities. Lawrence was surprised. He had been expecting something much weirder. 5-legged frogs, perhaps.
Ha! Are you are you surprised? Even here in the north there are people who think alchemists are basically sorcerers. In truth, they're not so different from metalsmiths. They heat metals or melt them down with acids, of course. They turned right. They turned right at a narrow intersection. In reality, there are some who research sorcery. Battles looked behind them and then twisted his lip in a feral grin. Lawrence had stopped walking for a moment, at which Battles immediately smiled apologetically. But I've only heard rumors of them, and I don't believe any of the alchemists in this district have met any such people. And, incidentally, everyone living in this area is basically a good person. This was the first time Lawrence had heard an alchemist who practiced their arts without any fear of God described as good people. Whenever the subject came up, alchemists were spoken of in fearful, incurious tones, as though they had committed some unspeakable corruption. They're my bread and butter after all, so I can't very well accuse them of being bad people now, can I? A slightly relieved Lawrence smiled at Battles. Very merchant-like statement. Battles' very merchant-like statement. Shortly thereafter, Battles stopped before the door of one of the buildings. The street received no sunlight and was riddled with holes and dark puddles of water. The stone wall facing the alley had a wooden window that was cracked open, and an entire two-story building seemed to lean on one side. It could have been a building from any slum in the world, but there was one important difference. The area was completely silent. No peals of childish laughter sounded. Come now, don't be so nervous. They're really fine people here. No matter how many times Battles tried to reassure him, Lawrence could only give an uncertain smile in return. It was impossible for him to not be nervous. This was, after all, a place where people lived who had been branded criminals of the most serious sort by an authority that brooked no opposition. Excuse us, is anybody home? Battles called out casually, knocking upon the door without any such fear. The ancient door seemed like it had gone years without being opened. Lawrence could hear a cat's quiet meow from somewhere. A monk accused of heresy, chased out of a monastery. What kind of person would that be? A shriveled old frog of a man appeared briefly in Lawrence's mind, clad in a tattered robe. This was no rule for a traveling merchant. The door opened slowly. Well, if it isn't Mr. Batos. The moment was so anticlimactic that Lawrence was nearly collapsed. It's been a while. You seem well. I could say the same of you, spending all your time in the mountains of Hyoram. God must favor you indeed. It was a tall... Oh, it's a woman. Oh. It was a tall, blue-eyed woman who had opened the thin wooden door. She seemed to... few years older than Lawrence, but the fashionable robe draped comfortably around her body gave a nonetheless fascinating aura. Her speech was lively and pleasant. She was indisputably beautiful. But in that instant, Lawrence thought of that which all alchemists sought, the power of immortality. Which... The word appeared in his mind just as the woman looked at him. Well, you're a quite handsome man. But do you think me a witch? I can see it in your eyes. The woman had seen right through him. Battles spoke quickly to smooth things over. In that case, perhaps that's how I should introduce you. Don't be absurd. This place is already quite tedious enough. And in any case...
In any case, is any witch as pretty as I am?
I hear I hear many women are exposed as witches because of their beauty.
Ah, you never change, Mr. Batos. No doubt you've hideaways all over Hioram. Lawrence had no idea what was going on, so he abandoned his attempts to grasp the situation and concentrated instead on calming himself. He took 1.5 deep breaths. Then he straightened himself and became Lawrence the traveling merchant. So, my dear, it's not me that has business with you.
So, my dear, it's not me that has business with you today, but Lawrence here.
Battles seemed to have noticed Lawrence's regain of his composure. At his well-timed statement, Lawrence took a step forward, but put on his best mercantile smile and greeted the woman. Please excuse my rudeness. I am Croft, Lawrence. A traveling merchant. I have come to call upon one Diane Rubens. Might he be in the house? Lawrence rarely spoke so formally. The woman stood with her hand on the door, silent for a moment, before smiling amused. What? Did Batos not tell you? Oh, Batos.
Oh,
Batos lightly smacked his head with his hand as if to punish his own carelessness. And then he looked to Lawrence apologetically.
Mr. Lawrence, this is Miss Diane Rubens.
Diane Rubens, at your service. It's quite a masculine name, is it not? But please call me Diana. Said the woman, her manner suddenly very elegant as she smiled. It was enough to make Lawrence feel that she must have been attached to a very well-to-do monastery indeed. Well, enough of that. Please come in. I do not bite, said Diana with a mischievous smile as she gestured into the house. The inside of Diana's home was not so very different from the outside. It called to mind a captain's quarters in a battered vessel that had been through a bad storm. Wooden chests reinforced with iron bands were everywhere. Piled in the corner of the room, their drawers left sloppily open, and there were sturdy, expensive-looking chairs, mostly buried under clothes over books. Also within the room were countless quills and pens, quill pens, as if some great bird had been grooming in the room. The only place in the room that seemed to be marginally free from the chaos were the bookshelves, with a large desk where Diana plied her trade. So, what might your business be? Asked Diana, pulling a chair out from under a desk, on which by some miracle of planning sunlight fell. She neither put hot water on nor gestured for her guest to sit down. Tea or not, just as Lawrence was wondering if she wouldn't do something about a place to sit, Batos took the liberty of removing items from one of the chairs, turned into a storage, and gestured for Lawrence to sit. Even the most arrogant nobleman would invite his guest to sit. Lawrence felt no special malice behind Diana's eccentricity. It seemed part of her strange charm. First, I should apologize for my intrusion, Lawrence said. Diana smiled and nodded at the standard pleasantry. Lawrence cleared his throat and continued. Actually, Miss Rubens, I was... Diana, please, she corrected him immediately, her expression serious. Lawrence concealed his Lawrence concealed his perturbation. Perturbation. Excuse me, he said, and Diana's face resumed its soft smile. Yes, as I was saying, I have heard that you are quite knowledgeable about the old tales of the Northland. I was hoping you would share some of that knowledge with me. The North? Yes. Diana's countenance became thoughtful, and she looked at Bartos. And here I thought he'd want to talk business. You jest. He had spoken of business, you'd have... Had he spoken of business, you'd have him out on his ear. Diana laughed at Bartos's words, but Lawrence got a sense that it was probably true. But you don't even know if I know the tale you seek. That might mean the tale I heard was made up from the whole cloth, said Lawrence. Well then, it appears you have to tell me this tale first. Shall I do the listening? Lawrence had to look away from Diana's kind smile as he cleared his throat. He was grateful Hollow was not there. In that case, the story I wish to hear concerns a village called Joitse. Ah, the one said to have been destroyed by a moon-hunting bear? Diana seemed to have immediately opened the drawers of her memory. Given how quickly the subject of the town's destruction had come up, Lawrence felt again that leaving Hollow behind was the right choice. It looked as though Joitse had really had been destroyed. His head hurt when he thought of how he went to break this news to Hollow. As Lawrence thought this over, Diana stood slowly and approached the room's strangely well-ordered bookshelves. Taking down a single volume from a neat row of large tomes. I seem to recall... Ah, here it is. The Moon-Hunting Bear, also known as Irawa ver Muhedunde. And Joitse, the village it destroyed. There were many stories of the bear, all quite old, though, said Diana, smoothly as she scanned the pages. She had a callus on her index finger from writing, and it was swollen, making it seem quite possible that she had written all of these books. How many pagan tales and superstitions were contained in those pages? Something suddenly occurred to Lawrence. Bartos had said he was thinking of making a business out of old tales. No doubt meant selling Diana's books to the church. With the stories in the books, the church leaders would be able to instantly ascertain which heretical beliefs had penetrated which lands. They would do nearly anything for such information. It's not the bear I'm interested in, but the town. The town? Yes, I have occasion to be searching it out. Is there anything in your tales that might reveal its location? Anyone would have been puzzled by Lawrence's question, which had nothing to do with the source of the commodity, but rather the setting of foreign old legend. Diana made an expression of surprise and then set the book on the table and began to think. Location, eh? Location, indeed. Have you any ideas? Lawrence asked then, at which Diana put her one hand to her head as though suffering a headache and gestured for Lawrence to wait with the other. As long as she was silent, it was easy to imagine this striking woman as the head of the head of some solemn convent. But seeing her like this revealed an amusing, comical side of her personality. Diana's eyes were screwed shut as she groaned with the effort of searching her memory. But then she suddenly looked up, happy as a maiden who had just succeeded in threading a needle. I have it! At the headwaters of the Rhone River, which flows north of Ploania. There's a story like this in an old town called Lenos, she said, suddenly and surprisingly as baffled as she had been when speaking to Batos. She seemed to forget herself when talking about old tales. Diana cleared her throat, closed her eyes, and began to recite from an ancient legend. Long ago, a lone wolf called Holo appeared in the village. Its great height was such that one had to look up to view it. The villagers were certain that it was the punishment from the gods, but Holo told of her journey from the deep forests of the east, explaining that she was bound for the southlands. She loved wine and at times would take the form of a maiden and dance with the village girls. Her form was both fetching and youthful, though she kept her wolf tail, and frolicking with them for a time she blessed their harvest and continued south. Since that time bountiful harvests have continued, and we of the village remember her as Hollow of the Wheat Tail. Lawrence was doubly surprised, both at Diana's smooth recitation and the mention of Hollow's name. The name's pronunciation was slightly different, but it was unmistakably the story about Hollow. Her blessing of the harvest supported that, as did her maiden's form and retaining her lupine tail. Yet this surprise paled in comparison to the content of Diane's tales. A town of Lenos still existed at the headwaters of the Rhone River. Using that as a reference point and knowing that there was a forest to the east, Lawrence could draw a line southwest from Niohira and east from Lenos, which would put you right at the intersection. Was that any use? Yes, it limits the area of the forest east of Lenos, and it's a great help. I'm so glad. Surely I repay you as soon. Lawrence was cut off by the gesture of Diana. As you can see, even if the church pursues me for it, I love the old pagan tales. The ones I haven't been twisted out of for consideration of church beliefs. As you are indeed a traveling merchant, Mr. Lawrence, surely you have even one story you could share with me. If you'll do that, I'll require no further payment. And those who compose histories for the church did so to preserve the church's authority. Historians retained by the nobility composed works praising their employers. This was simply the way of the world. The church's tale of Saint Ruvenhagen's namesake of the great church city bearing the same name was quite different from Hollow's story of the man. The tale was deliberately rewritten to protect and extend the church's authority. Diana loved the old tales enough that she was willing to live in the slums of Cumberson, a town devoted to religious and economic freedom. Lawrence wondered what terrible knowledge she must possess to have been chased from her cloister on charges of heresy. But now he saw that she simply loved the old tales enough to die for them. Understood, he said, and began to tell his tale. It was the tale of a place known for its bountiful wheat harvest, and the tale of the wolf that ruled over them. Eventually, once they had gotten into some wine and wound up talking old tales and legends from all sorts of lands, the sun was low and in the sky, and Lawrence finally remembered himself, and politely refusing Diana's invitation to stay, he left the house with Batos. He and Batos walked along the narrow street. Neither could help laughing as they talked. Um, okay, never mind. Not die me now, please. Of Cumberson. Thanks to Diana, he had grasped he had a general grasp of Yoitz's location, and thus could not be heading for Neohira, but rather the town of Lenos. Lenos was closer, and the road leading to it was better maintained. He expected that once he was in Lenos, he would be able to get more detailed information about the legends of Hollow. Thus, it was that Lawrence found himself visiting Mark again. As Mark had gathered travel information for him, he needed to know about this change of destination.
Hey there, lover boy!
As Lawrence approached Mark's shop, he saw Mark with a bottle of wine in one hand, looking merry indeed. The young apprentice he had sent out to contact Battles earlier was now red-faced and prone in the back of the shop. It was Mark's wife, Adelaide, that attended to closing the shop, covering the piles of goods with canopy against the evening dew. As soon as she noticed Lawrence, Adelaide gave a slight nod and pointed to her husband with a chagrined smile.
What's wrong? Here, have a drink. So about that information you asked me this morning. Oh, that's too much.
Mark didn't seem to hear Lawrence's protest as he poured. So about that information. Whoa, that's too much. Mark didn't seem to hear Lawrence's protest at all as he poured the wine from a ceramic wine bottle into a wooden cup. His expression suggested that he would have nothing to say until Lawrence picked up the cup, which was now nearly overflowing with wine.
Fine, fine,
exasperated Lawrence. Lawrence took the cup and put it to his lips. It was good wine, and he suddenly wanted some jerky to go with it.
So what was that? Have you changed travel plans?
Indeed. There's a town, Lenos, at the headwaters of the Rome River. That's where I'm going.
Oh, that's quite a change indeed.
And here it already collected quite a bit of information about the way to Neohira. If he had not been able to think clearly despite the wine, Mark would have never been a merchant. Apologies, circumstances have changed a bit.
Oh,
said Mark with a smile, as he gulped down the wine as if it were water. He regarded Lawrence with a look of amusement.
So it's true that things have gone bad with that companion of yours?
There was a pause. What did you say? Lawrence finally asked.
Word's gotten around, lover boy. Everyone knows you're holed up in an inn with a gorgeous nun. You surely got no fear of God.
Cumberson was a large enough town, but it wasn't so large as Ruvenhagen. Word spread around quickly from one merchant to another, until nearly all of them would have heard the news. The bonds between traders were strong. If someone had seen Hollow with Lawrence, word would get around. If Mark knew about Hollow, then everyone at the trading company would also know. He was glad he hadn't returned with Batos. What he did not understand was why things why Mark said things had gone bad and sour between Lawrence and Holo. We don't have that sort of relationship that makes for a good story over wine, but I don't see why you'd say things have gone bad with her. The lover boy knows how to play dumb, that's for sure, but I can see the worry on your face. Well, there's no mistaking that she has beauty, that she's a beauty. If things were to go poorly with us, it would be a shame. Lawrence was surprised at his own ability to stay cool during the exchange. No doubt it came about because he was used to the constant teasing from Holo. Although the truth to be told, he felt he would have preferred for this business acumen to have gotten sharper rather than his patience. Mark burped. Why, just a moment ago I heard that your companion was seen with a company of a young lad from the trading guild. From our trading guild. Evidently they were getting on quite well. Ah, you mean Mr. Amati? Lawrence didn't feel comfortable calling the boy simply Amati, and yet Mr. suddenly seemed unnecessarily subversive as well.
Oh, you've already given up then?
You seem to be mistaken. I simply had business today and was unable to accompany her, and Mr. Amati found himself with a free time and wished to show us around town. These two events happened to coincide. That's all. You don't believe me? Lawrence had fully expected Mark to appear disappointed, so he found himself confused at Mark's look of genuine concern.
I used to be a traveling merchant like you, so I'll give you some advice. Amati is more formidable than he seems.
What do you mean?
What I mean is, if you're careless, he'll snatch that pretty little companion of yours right out from under you. Men his age will do anything to gain the object of their obsession. And do you know how much fish Amati moves? It's a lot. And what's more, he was born in a pretty nice region of the south, but once he figured out that as the youngest child he'd never be able to make anything of himself, he went away from home and came here to open his business. It was just 3 years ago. Quite a story, eh?
It was hard to imagine the slight Amati doing all that, but Lawrence had seen for himself the boy's 3 cartloads of fresh fish. What's more, Amati had easily arranged a room at an inn facing the main avenue, albeit the one which he sold fish. During a time when the town was overflowing with travelers coming and going, this was no mean feat. A seed of fear began to take root in Lawrence's heart, but at the same time he could not believe that Hollowood could transfer her affection so easily. No need to worry, my companion is not so fickle.
Ah, you have a lot of faith. I heard my Adelaide was about... if I heard my Adelaide was out with Mati, I'd give up right on the spot.
What's this of me and Amati? And Amati? Said Adelaide, a truly frightening smile on her face. She had been behind Mark for some time as she cleaned up the shop in place of her husband. Adelaide and Mark had fallen in love for 4 years earlier, when as a traveling merchant, Mark had visited Cumberson. The love story was quite famous in the town, and it was enough to make even a third-rate minstrel throw up his hands in disgust. She now possessed all the dignity of a wheat merchant's wife. When Lawrence first met her, Adelaide had been quite frail, but now she was even more robust than her husband. 2 years previous she'd given birth to their first child. Perhaps it was the strength of motherhood that she had now.
What I was saying was that if I ever saw you out with Amati, why, you're so dear to me that the flames of my jealousy would burn my flesh.
Burn away, dear. I'll just light the fire with the cinders you left behind to make some tasty bread for Mr. Amati. Adelaide was so caustic that all Mark could do in response was take another drink. Perhaps women everywhere really are stronger.
So then, Mr. Lawrence,
Mr. Lawrence, said Adelaide, drinking in the company of this sot must make the wine taste poorly. We'll be closing up shop here, so why don't you come by the house and help yourself to some dinner? The baby may be a bit noisy, though. Lawrence couldn't even begin to imagine how much mischief Mark's child would be capable of. He was not especially good with children, but that wasn't why he declined the offer. I've still more business to attend to, unfortunately. It was a lie, of course, but Adelaide nodded her regret without any trace of suspicion. Mark, on the other hand, smiled as though having seen right through Lawrence.
Oh, indeed, you've unfinished business aplenty, and good luck to you.
Yes, Mark had seen the truth of it. Lawrence managed a weak smile. Yes, so I'll keep...
yes, so I'll keep your new destination in mind. About the route to Lenos.
I appreciate it. Lawrence finished off his remaining wine, thanked the couple again, and took his leave. He noticed himself walking more quickly through the lively, bustling night, and laughed at his own folly. It actually claimed to have unfinished business. Ridiculous. But it articulated the real reason made Lawrence hate himself, so admitting to anyone else was out of the question. Amati and Hollow walking happily together, the image flashed briefly through his mind. Despite his frustration, he noticed himself quickening his step more and more. The boisterous clamor grew louder as the evening deepened. Lawrence was well into working out his upcoming travel plans with ink and pen, borrowed from the inn when Hollow finally returned. Lawrence had hurried back into the inn only to find that Hollow was still out. And although he'd swallowed his disappointment, the time did give him the chance to calm himself, for which he was grateful. Amati had taken his leave from her in front of the inn. Hollow said, so she had come up to the room alone. Judging from the foxkit skin muffler around her neck, Amati had been taken for quite a ride. There was no doubt in Lawrence's mind that she'd gotten him to buy her more than that. His relief and happiness at seeing Hollow's safe return was nothing compared to the headache that came with trying to figure out what would be an appropriate way to thank Amati. It's too tight. Come help me with this, won't you? How much had she eaten or drunk? Hollow seemed incapable of taking off her own clothes. Lawrence sighed and got out of his chair, walked over beside the bed and undid the sash. Hollow struggled so valiantly against. He also removed the rope that was cinched up against her skirt. If you're going to lie down, take off your muffler and shawl. They'll wrinkle otherwise. Hollow grunted vaguely in reply. Lawrence managed to stop her from falling over into the bed right then and there. And he helped her take off the muffler and rabbit's skin shawl, as well as the triangular kerchief that she wore on her head. Hollow nodded off as she let Lawrence have his way with her clothing. She had probably parted ways with Amati in front of the inn because she was unable to keep herself together any longer. Once Lawrence managed to get her out of the muffler, shawl and kerchief, she immediately flopped onto the bed. Though he couldn't help smiling when he looked at the carefree wolf, Hollow's sighed when he glanced at the Lawrence sighed when he glanced at the fox kit skin muffler. He couldn't imagine buying such an item for resale, let alone as a gift. Hey you, what else did you get him to buy, eh? If Amati had gone this far, it likely it seemed he'd bought her something still more costly. Holo didn't have any energy to lift her legs onto the bed, and her strange position remained unchanged. As she took the long, slow breaths of the deeply asleep. Her ears were the ears she was so proud of gave a nary twitch at Lawrence's question. Realizing there was nothing else to do, Lawrence lifted her legs up onto the bed, and even then did she not so much as open her eyes. He wondered if this utter defenselessness was due to her trust or simply disdain. He mulled it over for a while, but ultimately decided that such thoughts would only lead to disappointment, so he banished them from his head. Putting the muffler and shawl back on the desk, he began to fold up her robe. As soon as he did so, something fell out of the robe and hit the floor with a clunk. He picked up the object. It was a beautiful metallic cube. Iron? No. It has sharp, carefully filled edges, and the surface was beautifully smooth, even in the dim moonlight. Even if it were just metalwork, the cube would have been a valuable piece, but there was no telling how angry Hollow would be if he woke her up just to ask about it. He set the cube on the desk, deciding to ask about it the next day. He put the robe over the back of the chair and folded the kerchief, then rolled up the sash and after smoothing out the wrinkles. For a moment he wondered why he was attending to these menial tasks. He was no manservant after all. But one look at the sleeping Hollow snoring away artlessly on the bed was enough to dispel his indignation. She made no move to do it herself, so Lawrence walked over to the bed and drew the covers over her, chuckling. He then returned to his desk and his travel plans. If this circumstance didn't allow him to put the north to stay in the north while he searched for Yoitze, he would simply have to change his business plan and accommodate some travel in the north. Whether or not he would actually follow those changes, there was no harm in making the plan. Also, it had been some time since he'd really sat down with a pen and paper and listed the towns, trade routes and commodities, and profit margins that made up the life of a traveling merchant. He was filled with nostalgia when he remembered the times he had once burned the midnight oil to make such plans. There was one large difference between then and now, though. Were the plans being made for his own sake or someone else's? Lawrence worked the pen in hand, listening to Hollow's quiet snores until the tallow candle burned itself out. Food, drink, the scarf and this dye. Anything else? That was all. Well, that was enough, that and enough sweet talk to fill a lifetime, said Hollow lightly, chewing the comb she used to comb her tail. Lawrence regarded her warily. He'd been relieved when she woke up without a hangover and had immediately interrogated her about the events from the previous nights. Looking at the gifts she had received in the light of the morning, Lawrence could tell they were of considerable value. So you ate and drank the night away, but then there's this muffler. I can't believe you'd go and accept such a thing. It's fine fur, is it not? Though nothing compared to with my tail. Why did you make him buy this thing? You think me so shameless? Why, he practically pressed it on me. Rather fashionable of him, though, giving a muffler as a gift. Lawrence looked at the fox-skin piece, then at Holo. She continued, sounding pleased. He's quite mad about me, you know. I'm sorry, did I ask for a joke? You can't just call it over and done when you receive a gift this valuable. Here I just thought you let someone else show you a good time, but now look at the debt I carry. Holo giggled. That was your plan all along, was it? I thought as much. I'm taking the consideration for the scarf out of your funds for the festival, just so you know. Holo glared at him, but turned away, doubly annoyed upon seeing Lawrence glared right back at her. I trust you didn't show him your ears or tails, at least. You needn't worry. I'm not quite that foolish. Based on her state the previous night, Lawrence had not thought to worry about such a possibility, but now he wasn't so sure. I suppose you were asked all sorts of relationship, what sort of relationship you have with me? What I would like to know is precisely why you're asking. Oh my god. If our stories do not match, people will begin to suspect things. Right you are. Yes, I was quite thoroughly questioned. I am a traveling nun that and you saved me from being sold off by evil men, is what I told him. Aside from the part about Holo being a nun, that was more or less consistent with the truth. But once you saved me, I fell deeply into your debt, and as I cannot hope to repay it, I'm gradually working it off by praying for your safety as we travel. Oh, alas and alack, woe is me. My voice was desperately sad as I told the truth. Told the tale. What do you think, eh? It has a ring of truth. Although it irked Lawrence that he seemed to be the villain of the story, it did seem convincing. As soon as I told the tale, he bought me the muffler, said the fake traveling nun. Said the fake traveling nun with a freakishly smile. Said the fake traveling nun with a devilish smile. I suppose that will do, but what of this die? What made him buy you something like this? Lawrence was unable to discern the color of the thing in the dim moonlight, but he could now tell that the cube was metal, so perfect it seemed like the work of a master smith, and had distinctly yellow tint, like unpolished gold. Lawrence had seen this kind of gold-like mineral before. It was not the work of any human, but entirely natural. Oh, that? The fortune teller was using it. They say it's a dye that can divine the future. It has a lovely shape, has it not? I can scarcely fathom how it was made. There's no doubt it'll sell for some fine coin. You fool! Do you actually think you can sell this? Said Lawrence, using the same tone as she often rebuked him with, although his ears pricked at the sudden harshness. This is no dye. It's a mineral called pyrite, and no man made it. His information was obviously unexpected. Holo regarded him dubiously, but Lawrence ignored this, plucking the yellowish crystalline cube off the desk and tossing it at Holo. I suppose the Wolf that guarantees the harvest should know little of rocks. That die-shaped stone was mined just as you see it. Hollow smiled uncertainly, clearly disbelieving him, as she toyed with the pyrite. You should be able to tell that I'm not lying. Hollow murmured quietly and held the pyrite up between her fingers. It's not good for much. It's often sold as a souvenir. And since it looks like gold, sometimes it's used by swindlers. Was anyone else buying it? Oh, indeed, many. The fortune teller had a great skill, enough to impress me even. He claimed that with dice like this, anyone could read the fates. So all that were gathered wanted the pyrite dice he was selling. He made up all manner of reason why they were desirable. You mean the dice? Indeed, even the ones less perfect in shape than this he claimed would ward away sickness or evil. Lawrence felt a certain professional respect for anyone who invented such a lucrative business. Festivals and affairs often sparked strange fads. The church atmosphere made for great business, but pyrite was quite an angle indeed. Mati bid down the price on that die too. Genuinely surprised. This genuinely surprised Lawrence. He bid it down. The crowd had gotten quite enthusiastic. I'd not seen that sort of competition before. It was something to see indeed. I expect I could sell the die quite dear now. Lawrence thought of Batos, who traveled the Hyoram regions. Did Batos know of this? If he had pyrite on hand or connections to gain it, there might be excellent business to be had here. Lawrence had gotten that far in his train of thought when there was a knock on the door. For a moment he considered the possibility that Amati had spotted Hollow's ears and tail, and he decided that the perceptive Hollow... But then he decided that the perceptive Hollow would have noticed in that case. He looked from the door to Hollow and saw that she drew the bedcloth over herself. Evidently, the visitor was at the door was not of the dangerous sort he had encountered in Pazio. Lawrence walked over to the door and opened it. On the other side was Mark's young apprentice. I apologize for calling so early this morning. I have a message from my master. It was hardly early in the morning, and Lawrence couldn't imagine what was so pressing that it would inspire Mark to send his apprentice on an errand just when the market would be opening. He wondered if Mark had perhaps fallen gravely ill, but no. Were that the case, the boy would not claim to have a message from his master. Hollow shifted underneath the blankets, popping out her head. The boy noticed and glanced away, seeing the girl on the bed, covered from the neck down in blankets. Was evidently more than he had bargained for, and turned away red-faced. So what's the message? Oh, yes, he said you need to know right away, so I ran over here immediately. Actually, the shocking news had Lawrence running through... The shocking news had Lawrence running through the streets of Cumberson a moment later. Oh, what a long chapter. I mean, the first chapter was a bit shorter, so... I guess. But still. Oh well. That is where I'm gonna head it off for tonight. Thank you all for watching. Tomorrow, some Dead by Daylight. If I'm correct? Yes. Dead by Daylight tomorrow. And... yes, Thursday, starting the new game of Yakuza. But oh well. I wish you all a very pleasant night. Sleep well. And I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye bye.